Hey there! Welcome back to another review, this time of X2, X-Men United, which is about as close as you can get to a masterpiece or a masterwork as humanly possible for an X-Men film. This set the gold standard for X-Men movies, and I don't think it has been surpassed since. At least that's just my personal opinion. At least it's my opinion anyway. Now, I had not seen this film, just like the first movie, in a long time. But just like the first film, I watched this a lot growing up on DVD. Now, I also saw this in the theater. It came out on my birthday on May 2nd in 2003. And, of course, I was super hyped, super psyched for it because I loved the first film. So this is one of my most anticipated sequels ever, if I remember correctly, was X2. It had a great teaser trailer, had a good trailer, and the movie definitely did live up to the hype. Now, this is also one of those sequels that's a little bit better than the first. I wouldn't say it's miles better than the first. In certain aspects it is. In particular, the action. This has the best action sequences out of the whole franchise, for me personally. Last Stand has some good bits of action here and there, but it doesn't really have the story and the writing and the direction that's good enough to really make it really pop. This, on the other hand, has some just absolutely amazing action sequences in it. The whole sequence in the beginning with Nightcrawler, when he's attacking the White House, the climactic battle sequences, in particular the fight between Wolverine and Deathstrike. Yeah, it's a really, really fairly action-packed film, and of course, you can't forget the assault on the X Mansion, and Wolverine goes berserker on all of these poor souls who decided to come to the wrong house. Yeah, this was a really great film. This is an excellent sequel and an excellent movie. Now, Bryan Singer comes back as to direct the film, and he actually improves upon his direction from the first movie. I thought his direction in the first film was great. I thought it was really good. Here, he really shows talent for action, for directing fight sequences and stuff like that, and doing a lot more effects-heavy work. But also doing a good job showing, directing sequences that need to display a lot of emotion, and he did a great job with that. Now, this one has a script by three different people. You have Michael Dougherty, Dan Harris, and David Hayter. They all lent their hands and their talents to this screenplay, based on a story by David Hayter and Zach Penn. Patrick Stewart is just superb as Professor X. So Patrick Stewart comes back for of course. So the film stars Patrick Stewart as Professor X, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. This might be, I haven't seen Logan yet, and I'm going to, hopefully sometime tomorrow. This might be one of his best performances. Actually, not might be. It is one of his best performances as Wolverine is in this film, especially when he's reacting to the loss of Jean. Ian McKellen, wonderfully, gleefully villainous as Magneto. Halle Berry, there were reshoots that happened where there were more scenes with Storm that were put in over scenes with Cyclops because of Halle Berry's recent popularity, because of her role in Monsters Ball. And you can kind of tell, but I didn't mind it because she was fine. Um, Famke Janssen, I still don't know if I said her name correctly or not. She is at the top of her game here as Jean Grey. Her chemistry with Logan, with Hugh Jackman, was at its peak here, and so was her chemistry with Scott, with James Marsden. Now, James Marsden delivers probably what might be the best acting performance I've seen from him in any film in this movie. Um, Honestly, he should have been in the film more. His performance was great. I thought it was a fantastic, really well done, well acted performance. He just wasn't in the film that much, and that's one of the few problems I did have with X-Men 2. Rebecca Romijn is back as Mystique and is as sexy as ever, and she has a crowd-pleasing scene-stealing scene where she fucks up a bunch of these soldiers at Stryker's complex and slide, and she delivers the most graceful middle finger I've ever seen in any film. It's just doing all this ballet style fighting, and then she slides into these closing sliding doors, and then just flips the bird. I love that. It's just like, whoop, yep, fuck you, yep, I'm graceful, and I'm a badass. Brian Cox is the new baddie, the new villain, Stryker. Just absolutely perfect casting. Really, a really amazing performance. Brian Cox is a great actor. He's displayed his talents in multiple different films, and this film is no exception. This is definitely one of his best performances of his career, and yeah, and I honestly might be. I mean, Ian McKellen is great as Magneto, and I've seen some other villains in the franchise that are good as well. But Brian Cox, man, he's such a cock. He's such a cock in this movie. He's such an asshole. But he's the type of asshole you love to hate because he's a great villain. Cotter Smith is actually in this as the president of the United States, which I was like, hey, that's Cotter Smith. That's the guy from Cameron's Closet. Nice to see him in something like this. Nice to see him here in a big tentpole film. Alan Cumming plays Nightcrawler. Underneath all the makeup, he really does bring the role to life and made it look really easy. It's probably my favorite role of his in any film is as Nightcrawler in this. Kelly Hu, she plays Deathstrike, and she's a badass. Aaron Stanford plays Pyro. He was also in the previous film, I believe. Shawn Ashmore comes back as Iceman. Bobby Drake. And you also have Anna Paquin, who returns as Rogue. It features a different score this time. The score is by John Ottman instead of Michael Kamen. I honestly miss Michael Kamen, and I'll talk about why a little bit later down the road, a little bit later in this review. Down the road. Yeah, down the road. Right over here, right over there, just right down the road. No. Cinematography by Newton Thomas Siegel. He comes back to do the cinematography for this film. And in a lot of ways, it's actually even more impressive than the first film, because a lot of the first film, there's a lot of set pieces that were just kind of, okay, we got the X Mansion, we got the stuff underneath it, we got all that kind of stuff. But here he's able to kind of jump out of the box a little bit more and shoot scenes and outdoor sequences, not just like in the woods for a little bit, to shoot like wide open spaces. And I love the way he shoots the facility and everything. I like his work anyway. I think he's a really underrated cinematographer. The editing is by Elliot Graham and John Ottman. John Ottman, I guess he's a jack of all trades. And he and Elliot Graham did an excellent job editing the film. Production design is by Guy Hendricks Dias. This is actually his first film, and absolutely stunning job for a first-time production designer. The original production designer for the first one doesn't return, of course, because this guy Hendricks Dias who takes over the duties, and he really does a phenomenal job with it. Especially the design of Stryker's lair and of a few other things, but mainly it's the dam and everything. I love the way it looks. Visual effects are by Rhythm and Hughes and Cinesite. Rhythm and Hughes worked on and actually created never before seen or used computer programs and different software in order to create the X-Jet sequence with the Blackbird with Storm and the fighter jet pilots that are chasing after him. And Cinesite handled a lot of the other stuff. The movie cost about $110 million, and the budget is really well used. just like the first film, there's a lot of practical effects. There's some CGI, but most of it is done practically, and I really, really love that. There actually is use of miniatures. The dam, when it breaks and busts open, it's a miniature, and it looks real. I could not tell that that was a miniature. That was really impressive. This is also one of the last few films I can think of that had such a big sequence shot with miniatures. This film shows you that miniatures might be the way to go, not CGI. I'm just saying. I was thinking that maybe CGI, had gotten to the point where it was better than miniatures, but after watching this film again in high definition, no. Go back to doing miniatures because that actually looks a lot more realistic than any CGI dam bursting I've ever seen. This is like night and day compared to the effects from Superman the movie. But Superman the movie, hey, that was great for the effects that were available back then. But for 2003, I mean, this is probably the best miniatures money could buy, and it definitely shows. The movie is a huge hit. It made $407.7 million worldwide. I think it made double its budget in the U.S. alone, and it was a critical and financial success, just like the first movie. And speaking of that, the financial critical success of X-Men, it immediately got 20th Century Fox to commission a sequel. They're like, sequel time. We got ourselves a franchise. Let's do this. Starting in November 2000, Bryan Singer researched various storylines from the X-Men comics, one of them being the Legacy virus storyline. And Singer wanted to study the human perspective, the kind of blind rage that feeds into warmongering and terrorism. Citing a need for a human villain, Bryan and producer Tom DeSanto envisioned X2 as the film series' The Empire Strikes Back, and that all the characters are split apart and then dissected, and revelations occur that are significant. The romance comes to fruition, and a lot of things happen. That's actually a great way to put it. In a lot of ways, X2 is The Empire Strikes Back of the X-Men franchise. And just like The Empire Strikes Back, it's my favorite film of the franchise. I mean, The Empire Strikes Back is my favorite Star Wars movie, and X2 is my favorite X-Men film. Even if Logan is great, it still would not be my favorite X-Men movie because that's more of a Wolverine film than just a straight up X-Men movie. So I kind of consider them two different things. No matter whether or not Fox puts X-Men Origins in front of their shitty origin movie, Wolverine Origins, I still don't buy into the fact that it's an X-Men film. No, it's a Wolverine movie. And I know it's a part of the X-Men franchise, and no one else was confused about that, Fox. But that's a whole other story. I'll get to that when I get to it. It's time to talk about the epic, awesome X2. Now, a producer, A.V. Ariad, he announced a planned release date of November 2002, but that didn't happen, thankfully, because that's kind of rushing things a bit. The first one came out in 2000, but I'm glad they took their time with this. I'm glad they took their time and released it in 2003. Like 3 years, like we gave it, we're going to make sure this is as great as we possibly can make it. And it shows. The time and the care and the effort they put into this sequel shows. This was not a rushed effort, unlike the film that comes after this. So, David Hayter and Zach Penn, they were hired to write separate screenplays. Hayter and Penn, they combined together what they felt to be the best elements of both scripts into one screenplay. Singer and Hayter worked on another script and finished that in October 2001. Michael Dougherty and Dan Harris were then hired by Fox to rewrite Hayter and Penn's script, turning down the opportunity to write Urban Legends Bloody Mary. That's another Urban Legends connection to the X-Men franchise, which, yeah, there's a bit of random trivia for you. There's like multiple different connections between Urban Legends and X-Men, of all things. Angel and Beast appeared in early drafts, but they were deleted because there were too many characters. Beast was also in an early draft of X-Men as well. It was deleted because of cost concerns. And also they thought, we have too many characters already. But Dr. Hank McCoy, you can see him on a TV interview in one scene in the film. Beast's appearance was to resemble Jim Lee's 1991 artwork of the character in X-Men Legacy. Angel was to have a mutant experiment by William Stryker, transforming into Archangel. Reference to Doherty's and Harris's efforts include Angel remains in form of an X-ray on a display in one of Stryker's labs. Something to kind of keep an eye out for. Tyler Mane was actually set to reprise as Sabretooth before the character was deleted altogether. I'm kind of like wondering why. I mean, he could have showed up and helped out Mystique and Magneto. I mean, I liked him, so it was kind of like, where did he go? And then it was just like, he's just been deleted. In Hader's script, the role eventually filled by Lady Deathstrike was Anne Reynolds. A character appeared in God Loves, Man Kills, a comic storyline, X-Men comic, as Stryker's personal assistant / assassin. But Singer changed her to Deathstrike, citing a need for another kick-ass mutant. I agree. I'm glad Singer added Deathstrike in here because that was really an inspired choice, and it paid off in spades. It was such a great choice because then it led to the epic, just badass fight between Wolverine and Deathstrike in the film's climax. So there was also to be more development on Cyclops and Professor X being brainwashed by Stryker, and these scenes were also apparently shot, but they were cut out of the film because of time length, because the movie was already over 2 hours, and because of complications with the story. Hader was upset. The Guyver wasn't feeling it. He felt that James Marsden deserved more screen time. I agree. James Marsden was actually a pretty bright spot in this movie. And it's kind of hard to see because he's barely in the film. Rewrites were commissioned once more, specifically to give Halle Berry more screen time, like I said. And there was also a budget cut that happened that meant that the Sentinels in the Danger Room were dropped. Because apparently, just like the first movie, we're going to have Danger Room, and, now we're going to have the Danger Room here, but nope, no Danger Room. Guy Hendricks Dias and a production crew had actually already constructed the Danger Room set. In the words of Dias, the control room was a large propeller that actually rotated around the room so you can sit up and travel around the subject who is in the middle of the control room. The idea for traveling is that if it's a mutant that has some kind of mind control powers, they can't connect. Now, this I would have loved to have seen, because this would have been similar to the same production design you saw in the X-Lair, the Cerebro room and the other places underneath the Xavier's, underneath the School for Mutants. And underneath that, of course, is this whole lair. And I love the metallic, smooth look of everything, and I would have loved to have seen the Danger Room with that same look and done practically. They actually built the Danger Room set. And nope, budget cuts. We're going to cut it out of the film. But they already built it. Why do you have to cut it out of the movie if it was already built? They already built the set. Why couldn't they just used it? I'm just saying, if the set's already built, you can't be like, oh, no Danger Room, but we already built the set. Still can't use it. Now, over 64 sets, speaking of sets, there were a lot of sets in this film. 64 sets were used in 38 different locations. I love it. I love that there are sets here, not CGI backgrounds. We're not doing this behind a green screen. More of these X-Men films and other movies can learn from this. Can we go back to building real sets again? Can we do that? Because I'd really, really like to see that. Now, I know I'm not the only one. So the film crew encountered problems when there was insufficient snow in I don't even know how to say that name. It's the name of some place in Canada, in Alberta. Canaskis? For them to use for some scenes. So a large amount of fake snow was applied. Probably the stuff in the beginning when Wolverine is going over there. It didn't look fake, so good job. Kudos to the people who put together the fake snow. The idea was to have Jean Grey, spoiler, sacrifice herself at the end and be resurrected in the third installment. And that idea was highly secretive. Singer did not tell Famke Janssen until midway through the filming, and cinematographer Newton Thomas Siegel, apparently, as well as two other stunt drivers, they nearly died while filming the scene which Pyro has a dispute with police officers, where he's like throwing fireballs at them. I'm glad they both made it out okay. That did look really dangerous because there was a lot of real pyrotechnics and real fire, not fire effects, real fire that was used, and I appreciate it, and I love that they used real fire, but it's dangerous. I'm glad nobody got hurt. The Blackbird in this film, it was redesigned and increased in size, and I think that was a really good choice. The Blackbird was fine in the first film, and also the effects on the Blackbird were much better in this one. In the first film, that was one of the few early 2000 CGI moments that kind of didn't really look that great. But here, it's hard to tell whether or not it's a model or if it's CGI. And they made it look like an actual SR-71 Blackbird, which I really liked. So that was another inspired choice out of many inspired choices for this film. Visual effects supervisor Mike Fink, who worked on the visual effects for the first film and actually got nominated for an Academy Award, he ended up helping out and working on everything, and up to 520 shots were created for an X-Men for the first film, while X2 commissioned roughly around 800. And apparently he wasn't really satisfied with his work for some reason in the first film. I don't know why. He got nominated for an Oscar, and I think it looks great. But X2, I have to admit, X2 looks just a little bit better. The 800 shots that they did, all of them, I mean, like I said, they had 520 shots that they worked on in X-Men, and X2 had 800, so there was more shots, but the same amount of care and effort was put into each shot, because this wasn't just one company working on it. There was Rhythm and Hughes, who created a new computer program for the dogfight tornado scene. Cinesight was in charge of scenes concerning Cerebro, enlisting a 20-man crew. The Alkali Lake Dam miniature was 25 feet high and 28 feet wide. Cinesight created 300 visual effects shots, focusing on character animation, while Rhythm and Hughes created over 100. Now, I think some of the same people who worked on the first film who did the makeup effects, I think they came back for this film as well. Because, of course, you have the wonderful effects on Mystique, and then you also have the effects on Nightcrawler. The prosthetics were really well put together, and they looked great. Yeah, overall, I mean, even the costume design, they kind of upgraded the X suits a little bit. So there was a little bit more to them. I noticed that they stood out more, or maybe it was the way that they were shot. Because maybe in the first film they weren't shot that well. Maybe it was in a lot of secrecy and darkness. But here you can really tell the little highlights on the suits. For example, Wolverine has a lot of yellow, dark yellow, that's highlighted in lines all over his suit. And you can even see some of the same patterns with the stretched out triangles that you've seen on his actual costume in the comics. So that was a nice little nod to the comics costume, because you see the same sort of patterns, but it's done in a different way. Now, I happen to actually like these suits, and even though it would have been nice to see the suits from the comics in the film, I don't think this is the right franchise for that. This particular Bryan Singer vision of X-Men, I don't think it's the right type of film for those type of suits. It just, because this series is taken rather seriously, and this film, I have to admit, is probably the one where the first film had a little bit more camp and a little bit more, not too much camp, but it definitely was having a lot of fun with itself. This one has less fun, but then it has so many great action sequences in it. It's really well directed. The pacing, it goes by like a bullet train. For a movie that's over 2 hours, it sure doesn't feel like it. It doesn't drag. So, yeah, I mean, I would have liked maybe a little bit more, fun little lines here and there, but I could see why they went this direction because it's a response to the post Batman and Robin era. Batman and Robin, Batman and Robin, Batman and Robin, Batman and Robin era of comic book filmmaking, which was an era that was just a total just dumpster fire. And so, in order to salvage what was left of the comic book film genre, Bryan Singer and the producers for X-Men decided, let's not go with the costumes because people are just going to think they're silly and stupid and they're not going to take it seriously. And also, they would stick out like a sore thumb in this type of storyline and this type of approach. Nowadays, I'd love to see it because you have the MCU and they've already proven that you can do this. And audiences are already prepared and already would love to see it. It's just there's a difference between audiences in 2003 or 2000 versus audiences today. There was no MCU for them to fall back on, so they went with the similar costume design, the same costume design as the first film. But you can see that these suits are a little bit more functional. They're not as stiff. And they have this nice little subtle touches to them in terms of the design, which I think is kind of overlooked. Now, the plot for the film is actually fairly straightforward. Even though it's a movie that's fairly long, a lot of the plot itself is really simple and it's easy to follow. And it's a great plot. Stryker wants to create his own Cerebro in order to kill off the mutants, and save mankind in his own twisted way. So he ends up using his son, who has this unique ability to create illusions that look real and trick people into believing they're in a room that they're not, and so on. And he's really good at manipulating people's minds and their reality. And so he wants to get Professor X, who knows how to use Cerebro. He wants to get him and have him focus and find all of the mutants and kill them. So it's up to the X-Men, and who are kind of split apart throughout most of the movie, and they have to reunite and team together in order to, save the mutants and to ultimately save the world, because Magneto gets involved. He escapes from his plastic prison, which is one thing I didn't mention in the first film, and I wish I did, but I'll mention it here. I love that idea. I love that they put him in a plastic prison. I mean, I thought that was brilliant, and I love the way the first film ended with Charles, pretty much telling his old friend that he'll be waiting, he'll be ready for the revolution or for the war that might be coming. And so he's in his plastic prison, and he escapes in a really novel way. I love it. Appears to have too much iron in your blood. I was like, wow, for a PG-13 film, he basically sucks out all the blood out of his body and turns it into an iron spear that would make the tall man blush, and then flies it through the plastic and escapes in epic fashion. It just grand fashion. It was awesome. That's always been one of my favorite scenes in X2 is how Magneto escapes in this film. And so now that I have to deal with Magneto, who actually does help them, but then he does it to serve his own good, his own goods, so to speak. And then that causes even more issues, and it gives the X-Men another villain that they have to deal with. So overall, that's basically the gist of the plot. And then you also have some stuff with Wolverine trying to rediscover his past and figure out what happened, and so on. And the seeds for the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants are also sown with Pyro and so on. Now, the film has a slew of pros. In fact, I don't really have that many cons when it comes to this movie. It's hard for me to even think of any. But I have a couple, but they don't affect my enjoyment of the film that much. So overall, they don't really hurt the film. They're just things that I noticed that I'm not particularly the biggest fan of, and I think could be done better. But overall, it does everything that it could do right. It does it. It does it right, and it does it the right way. It does it the right way. If I can say things, if I can even speak. I mean, maybe I'm just lost. I'm at a loss for words at how truly jaw-droppingly amazing this movie is. It still holds up great. I know at the time it was considered one of the best comic book films ever made. I still feel it is. This is in my top 10 easily, without a doubt, easily. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the last great X-Men film. At least the last great X-Men film that I've seen. I haven't seen Days of Future Past yet. I haven't seen Apocalypse. But I've seen the Wolverine. I've seen X-Men Origins. I do feel it's a million times better than those movies. But if people out there disagree, that's fine. But I do think this is one of those critically acclaimed comic book films that still holds up. And is still as great as it was when it came out. So, the directing by Bryan Singer, he ups the ante. Like I said earlier, he really has found a knack on how to shoot action sequences and how to shoot a film that has a lot of has a lot going on, but there's still he still manages to make it easy to follow and really nice to the eyes to look at. And he has some nice camera techniques and pans and all this other stuff. He's definitely evolved as a director, and you can tell in this film. The screenplay by these multiple different writers, maybe it could use a little bit more levity at times, but when it's there, it works. You know, where Wolverine is all like, "You picked the wrong house, bub." In some of the scenes at Bobby's parents' house. But its strong suit is definitely with the whole thing, with the whole dynamic between Stryker and Wolverine, the whole sort of stuff with the X-Men having to team up with Magneto and Mystique. I love the stuff where I love this antagonistic sort of relationship that they have. It's not really sort of. I love the antagonist. It's definitely antagonistic. And it really comes to a head when Mystique and Magneto were talking amongst themselves, and Mystique is laughing at some of the X-Men, and you know, Rogue is wanting to like touch one of them and take their powers or kill them, because you know they're making jokes and talking about, oh, I like the new look, your new hair, you know, this is kind of it's. So there's little bits and pieces like that are a lot of fun. But a lot of the strong points of the story is definitely the stuff with Stryker and his plan and so on. And how things are changed and how the team is ripped apart and how emotions come into play. Cinematography is visual splendor to look at. It's gorgeous. He does a great job, the cinematographer, of working with what he has, Newton Thomas Siegel. The editing, like I said, it's tight. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the film, and there's a decent amount of action sequences, and it's all edited really well. And the editing helps things have a good flow to them and a good pace. The acting is a real standout by Brian Cox, by Hugh Jackman, by Famke Janssen, by, like I said, even James Marsden, especially when he's dealing with the fact that Jean is sacrificing herself, and then when he realizes that she's gone. That was really powerful, and that was a really great performance, because I bought it. I believed it. Hell, I got choked up. I actually shed some tears at the end of this film because the emotions were so believable from these actors that I picked it up, and it affected me. It actually affected me emotionally. The visual effects and the makeup, like I said, really well done. The pacing, long movie, but it doesn't feel that way. In particular, the visual effects, I want to point out how they do the stuff where the sequences where Professor X freezes time, and they really outdid themselves there. And I know it probably wasn't a lot of visual effects related there. It was just a lot of people just standing still. And if you think about it, X-Men 2 did the mannequin challenge before the mannequin challenge was even a thing. So people might want to thank Professor X for the mannequin challenge. But yeah, visual effects definitely probably might be some of the best, if not the best I've seen out of this franchise. Uh, because there are some really kind of effects in X-Men 3, and definitely some pretty, most of the stuff in First Class is CGI. There's some really atrocious effects in Origins. Um, but here, like I said, they do it with as much practical effects and real sets as they possibly can. When the dam breaks, it's a real miniature with real water. And the other stuff, other elements that have to be CGI, like the tornadoes and stuff like that, and so on, actually look really good for a 2003 film. For 2003 era CGI, it doesn't look that dated. I've seen effects that look worse than some of the CGI visual effects that I've seen in this movie. And the action sequences, absolutely hands down, are just, oh, I love them. It's just one of those just delectable type of films that have these just really just delicious action sequences, scrumptious. Opens up with a great one with Nightcrawler. I remember when I saw this in the theater, and I was just like, I was captivated. Everyone in the theater was captivated. We're not expecting the film to open up like this. To open up with bam, Nightcrawler just bamfing everywhere and kicking ass. Uh, and then, of course, you have other little stuff too. Like even Cyclops got in the action a little bit with Lady Deathstrike. He shoots her with his laser, with his visor a couple times. Gets into some hand-to-hand stuff. It was a brief scene of Cyclops being a badass, but it was a nice scene. It was a well choreographed, well directed scene. And stuff with Storm. She had her moments. Wolverine, the Lady Deathstrike, the Deathstrike Wolverine fight. Some of the best choreography I've seen from a superhero film, especially from an X-Men movie. Definitely the best fight out of the entire franchise. There's some nice little fights and battle scenes in The Last Stand, but this is hands down the best one. And of course the assault on the X-Mansion. Absolutely the stuff of legends, of cinematic legends. Just Wolverine just fucking up these soldiers right and left. You got these just cameos everywhere too. You got Colossus, you got Kitty Pryde. So yeah, that was a really, really well done sequence. That was, words cannot express enough how much I love that sequence. And that's always been one of my favorite sequences and always will be. It showed you that you could have a PG-13 film and you could show Wolverine's berserker rage and it would still have all the impact, I mean, and fury that it needs to have. So, yeah, that was a real treat. And so yeah, action sequences second to none. The emotional impact, and I want to kind of end it with the pros with that. The emotional impact. I mean, it is an emotionally powerful film. The teaser to Dark Phoenix at the end was perfect. It was. I still remember my reaction to that when I saw it in the theater. My parents didn't know what I was talking about, and I was like, Phoenix! The Phoenix! The Phoenix! Dark Phoenix! And they were like, what the hell are you talking about? And there are other people in the theater like, shh! And I'm like, Phoenix! Yeah! And they're like, shut up! I couldn't contain my excitement. And that's why, oh God. That's why I'm so disappointed with The Last Stand. Because they set it up perfectly, a great teaser with the Phoenix flying over the water, and then fucking The Last Stand. Brett Ratner, Fox not wanting to be patient and wait for Bryan Singer to be available to direct the film. They were patient to let Bryan direct the first movie, but they weren't patient for him to finish the trilogy for some reason. Even after a film like this, which made more money than the first film did, was an even bigger critical smash, and nope, we're not going to wait. That's a whole other story. I'll get to that later. But it's kind of hard when I talk about X2. It's like, oh, I got to talk about that too. But anyway, yeah, those are all the pros for the film. And in terms of cons, I would have to say John Ottman's score, it's not terrible, but it's not really memorable. It doesn't have the really, I guess, it just doesn't, it isn't as rousing or as powerful as Michael Kamen's score was. It's there. The best part is at the end credits, and that isn't even heard in the film that much. The opening bit sounds too much like something from Spider-Man, and a lot of this actually does sound from, like, unused takes from Danny Elfman's score from Spider-Man. And I guess I just preferred Michael Kamen's score. You could say it's understated at times, and so on, but I didn't feel it was as cloying as John Ottman's score was at times. Or if it was cloying, I mean, it actually had emotion at least. This was just kind of generic sounding at times. Just trying, and at times it did work to add a little bit more excitement to certain scenes or some suspense and make certain sequences maybe a little bit more epic in scope, but it's not really an amazing score. There's nothing about this score that I really remember that really stands out. And Cyclops, he's better than the previous film, than he was in the previous film. He's more than just a dick. The relationship between him and Jean actually does feel genuine, unlike it did in the first film. But he's still underutilized. He has one short but badass mini scuffle with Deathstrike, like I mentioned earlier. But then most of the film, he's brainwashed by Stryker. And then he has a little scuffle, little bit of a battle with Jean Grey, who knocks him out of it. And then he's just there for the rest of the film to just be sad about Jean Grey. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't shoot his visor. He doesn't shoot optic blasts at these enemies. Mystique has a scene stealing sequence, but Cyclops doesn't. Cyclops is not a badass. Cyclops is kind of just a lame character. That's one of the worst things about this franchise, about this particular series, the Bryan Singer X-Men films, is how Cyclops is portrayed. Were the writers not a fan of Cyclops? I mean, if that's the case, I could tell. But I always liked Cyclops ever since the 90s cartoon. He didn't step up to the plate and be the leader that he's supposed to be. He wasn't a badass. He's been a badass in the comics. He's been a badass in the cartoon. He's not a panty waste. He's not a fucking Boy Scout. But, you know, James Marsden was fine. He just needed more to do. So that was definitely a knock on the film. You know, Cyclops once again gets the shafts. But overall, those are the only problems I have with the movie. Because if I was going to rate the film out of 5 stars, I give it. I mean, those two problems knock it down a little bit, so I'd probably say 4.5 out of 5. At first, I was like 5, but then I'm like, nah, there's too little problems. Those are some problems, especially with Cyclops. Underutilized. They don't really use him very well, and if they used him well, and he did more than just that one scene, and he actually was kicking ass, and had a scene where he's just shooting people right and left with his optic blasts, now that would be awesome. I mean, Magneto even had a badass scene where he's pulling pins out of these guys' grenades on their chests. Cyclops is just there. And the score, it could have been better. I think it could have added more to the film. I really would have liked to have heard more of Michael Kamen's score or more of the Logan and Rogue theme, but you know we didn't get that, and it is what it is. But other than those two things, everything else works about this film. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about the movie except, yeah, thanks for watching my review. And as always, I will see you guys later. See ya.